how do you follow that up? So, like Richard said, we're gonna shift our perspective a little bit. I would like to talk about how we take the sort of human experience that we've been talking about today and where we go with it. When we send people like Yvette into space someday, when we launch Nicole Mann into space, that human experience that we bring along with us comes with some practical implications. How do you walk on the moon? And how do you figure that out without actually being on the moon? That is NASA's current challenge, and I, as the Exploration EVA Operations Testing Lead, get to help figure that out. That is a mouthful, and instead of explaining it to you right now, I'm going to tell you about what I do, and by the end of it, I'm thinking that you'll probably know what that means better than I do. But we're going to start from square one. I know there are people here who have literally done this themselves, but for those of us who have not done it yet, spacewalking. Going outside of a spacecraft in your own personal human-shaped spacecraft. This is also called extravehicular activity because it's NASA, and therefore we refer to it as EVA, so you'll hear me talk about EVA throughout this. And it is the most dangerous thing that we ask our astronauts to do. You are leaving the protection of your spacecraft, and you're going outside in a human-shaped balloon to do work. We as humans have been doing spacewalks for quite some time, starting with Alexei Leonov in 1965, the first human being ever to leave the protection of his spacecraft. And right away we started learning that spacewalking was harrowing. I don't have time for that story, but catch me in a happy hour later, we can talk about Alexei Leonov's lessons learned. And we started learning about spacewalking fast. We escalated quickly to walking on the moon only 4 years later, Buzz Aldrin on the moon on Apollo 11 in 1969. But after that brief stint of working on the surface of the moon, we have primarily been doing EVAs in Earth orbit, in the microgravity environment, and we've gotten pretty good at it. In fact, Nicole Mann was not only the first Native American woman to travel to space, she was the first Native American woman to do a spacewalk, and this is her. So, pretty incredible person. But the microgravity EVA environment is different from what we're going to expect on the moon. And that's mostly because humans designed the International Space Station to be worked on by other humans. So it comes with some handy-dandy features like handrails everywhere. Every handrail even has a unique number, so that when I'm trying to tell my friend Nick Patrick in this photo how to get to this spot next to the cupola module on the International Space Station, I can literally give him Google Maps-style directions by handrail numbers to get him to that exact spot. And when he gets there, we're pretty sure we know what he's going to find, because again, we built the thing. So we know there's a panel there, and it's even labeled very helpfully for him to find it. And there are signs, road signs that say, hey, if you lose comm with Houston, here's how to get back to the airlock. So when we're doing a microgravity EVA, we have a very, very good idea of what the astronauts are going to find when they get there, and we can run highly scripted EVAs where we direct the crew from the ground to exact places to do exact things that we have a very solid understanding of. So much so that even the tools that Nick is carrying in this picture are indicative of the sort of work we do. The primary tool that we use on ISS EVAs on the International Space Station is the pistol grip tool, which is essentially a driver drill. Because we know there are bolts, and we know what torque they were at, we know the size, we know how many turns, we tell them exactly what we're going to find. But the moon is completely different. First of all, it's covered in dust. And not just dust, pulverized glass. This is lunar regolith that's been sitting out there being cycled by sunlight and pulverized by micrometeoroids for billions of years, and it's basically powdered glass that sticks to everything, ruins all of your spacesuit components, and tries to get into your lungs. So it's a hazardous environment for both people and machines. It's also hazardous because it's rugged, right? Who's gone hiking on the beach here between sessions or when they were back at the hotel? Can you imagine trying to walk over that in a spacesuit and hope you don't rip it? Dangerous environment. Next, what's beyond that hill? We don't really know. We have orbital imagery of the moon. We have an entire team of scientists, geologists engaged with the Artemis program to map the areas where we're going. But in a lot of cases, the best resolution we have for images is just under 1 meter per pixel. So if it's smaller than a meter, we may not even be able to see it to know that it's there. The astronauts are going to be discovering what is there and navigating themselves to these locations in a landscape where we do not have conveniently numbered handrails everywhere they want to go. So that's why the last feature here that I've got an arrow to is the astronaut's head. Because unlike the ISS, where I can say, I want Nick to go to handrail 5247 and drive bolt number 17, 13 turns, the first woman who lands on the moon is going to tell us what she found. And we are going to change our plans based on what she finds. So the way that we run EVAs on the moon is fundamentally different from the way that we run EVAs on the International Space Station, and we have to learn how to do that. So how do we prepare? The punchline got up here early. Analogs. So analogs are environments on Earth that allow us to simulate some aspect of life in space. And we have many analogs for exploring the moon in which we are practicing different aspects of our upcoming journey. I'm going to highlight 4 of them for you today, and just know that there's a whole cast behind these, but these are the Brad Pitts of the analog world for us. So the first one, which many of you have maybe heard of, is underwater at the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory at Johnson Space Center in Houston. And this is a 6 million gallon swimming pool, which includes an almost entire mock-up of the International Space Station, where our astronauts learn to conduct microgravity EVAs in an environment where you can put them in the water in a suit, and you add either weights or foam to various parts of their body to make them neutrally buoyant, so they neither rise nor sink in the water column. And astronauts have said this is the closest thing to being on an actual EVA in space, weightless, that you can get to on Earth. So if it works really well for the ISS, maybe we can try this for the moon. It has pros and cons. One, it looks really cool. And the primary, though, real benefit of the Neutral Buoyancy Lab is that you can put people like Zena Cardman in the actual suit that they will wear on the moon, and you can pressurize it just like it will be when they're on the moon, so that it feels the same way, it moves the same way that it will move when an astronaut is on the moon. Unfortunately, you can't really extend the same courtesy to the tools. So the tools, if you want them to function, they're going to be made of metal, they're likely going to be heavy, and they'll still affect the way that they're interacted with. It's also a pretty small space. Even though it's a 6 million gallon pool, there's only so far you can go, which means it's hard to simulate the actual lunar landscape at the bottom of a swimming pool. But we can also simulate lighting. We can control the lighting in the Neutral Buoyancy Lab. So we got some pros and some cons, but we can't represent the entire lunar environment underwater. So let's try gravity offload. This is our system called Argos, the Active Response Gravity Offload System. And again, it is an environment where you can put a person in a pressurized suit and have them move in the same way that they'll move on the surface of the moon. And the advantage you have here is that you're not 40 feet underwater. So it's easier logistically, and you don't have the water drag affecting the astronauts as they attempt to move across the surface of the test area inside of an environment like Argos. But, as you can see in this picture, it's, again, not a large environment. There's only so big of a frame that you can build to have a machine in it that offloads a suit and be able to offload it well. So even Argos is still limited. And again, you have the same limitation with the tools. You can't offload the tools, so they're also going to have the same weight that they would have on Earth, not the moon. So you could still have impacts to your training and your testing to prepare for going to the moon in a place like Argos. But another key advantage here is that all the people who are helping do not have to be on scuba to help the astronauts. So you can have people in their jeans helping the astronauts conduct testing in a place like Argos. So again, we got some pros, we have some cons. We haven't quite got 100% the lunar environment. So let's try another one. The other environment that we use is the field environment. This is our place to practice exploration-driven EVA, when that first woman tells us what she found and we respond to her responses, right? this is where we are going to explore and learn how to explore the moon. So what we do, we take an area of the Earth. In this case, this is an example from a study a couple of years ago out in Arizona, the Arizona desert, and we pretend it's the moon. We pull in a team of scientists from across NASA. The actual Artemis science team has participated with this in the past. We bring in those folks, and we give them the same data that we would give them if this were the moon. So we actually dumb down GIS data from the Earth because we have such great coverage of our planet in a lot of places. We simplify it so it's no better than what we would have when we plan a mission to the moon, and we actually map out the route that we would take to explore this area as if we were exploring the moon. The geologists build hypotheses, the engineering team then helps them plan out routes that get to those places while keeping in mind things like how much oxygen you have in your suit, what your rules are from how far you can go from the lander. And then we'll actually run it. We'll put folks in mission control back in Houston. We'll put astronauts out in the field, and we will have them run those EVAs as if they were on the moon. So an advantage to this is that you can put astronauts in an exploration scale context. We can have them explore this whole region of Arizona. But again, you're limited in what you can take with you. So you have a simulated suit, but it can only be so heavy before a person literally just cannot ruck it across the desert for hours on end as part of a simulated EVA. Another environment that's becoming more of a heavy hitter over time for us is virtual reality. The one thing that VR does really, really well is enable us to visualize the lunar landscape in a way we just cannot on Earth. The lunar South Pole, where we're going, is going to be an environment where the sun is very, very low on the horizon. Think just before sunset here on Earth, constantly. So the shadows are going to be extremely long. You're going to have areas of intense darkness and areas of extreme brightness, maybe sometimes far in the distance, which we can't really simulate when we do those exercises out in Arizona, because if it's night so that you can simulate being in a dark part of the moon, then you can't see those distant features to navigate off of like someone on the moon is going to have to. So we can use virtual reality to visualize that landscape to get better at learning how to navigate in this bright environment where light and dark are hard to represent in a place on Earth. So we use this for navigation and for understanding that lighting environment. But the geology is hard to represent. We'd have to spend a lot of time and money to visualize something exactly like a place on Earth. And then you could really only use it once, so you kind of run out of your simulation. Your bad guy cases, if you're running a sim and they want to have something surprise you, well, you've only got one model built unless you want to spend lots and lots of money. So we're somewhat limited in how you actually visualize the landscape at like a geologic exploration scale when you're looking at a rock, but it's great for visualizing the big scale landscape. So none of these are perfect, unfortunately. It turns out that the best way to get good at going to the moon is probably going to the moon. However, that isn't to say that we can't learn something from each of these different environments for a given reason, for a given test. So how do we choose which one of these we want to use to meet objectives to help us go to the moon? Well, we have to think carefully about what those objectives are. And this is my soapbox slide, which I'm actually not going to spend very much time on, but this is what I spend most of my job doing, is taking what NASA's goals are and what our priorities are for learning about going to the moon and identifying the right tasks to perform in the field that will actually reach those goals. So it really all comes down to what your priorities are. What are the goals established by the program? From there, you can define objectives. So the things that you actually need to learn from a specific test in order to meet those goals. And then you can define the tasks that will carry out those objectives. And that's how you come up with a solid test plan that will enable you to answer questions like, how do you build a procedure for walking on the moon? We've learned a lot of things. All of this is in the public domain. Our JET 3 is the field test we did most recently. Test report is actually out online. You can search for it and look over all these things. So I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail. But the big picture things are we're learning how to tie science into planning out an EVA on the surface of the moon. And we're learning things about suit design. And then maybe most importantly, we're learning how to tie all of these things together. So we're talking about the human experience. Going to the moon is maps, it's procedures, it's video, it's images, and how do you connect all of those things to build a complete picture of what happened when you were on the moon? We're learning about how to do that well so we can communicate what we learned to the next generation of explorers. And hopefully, by doing so, we will turn this computer-generated image on the right into Kate Rubins on the left, exploring the actual surface of the moon someday soon. And with that, thank you.